Hello everyone, this is Allie from Stuck on You Crochet, and today I am going to teach you how to crochet the loop stitch. So if you are joining us for the Stitchwork Scarf pattern, this is block 1 in our stitch along, and I've linked the information on how to join the stitch along if you're not sure what that is, or if you want to come join the fun. But over the course of February, we're going to release one block every few days, and each block features a different stitch design. So it's a fun way to learn some new stitches and then have a pretty cool project at the end of it. But if you're not joining for the Stitchwork Scarf and you are just trying to figure out how to crochet the loop stitch, then this tutorial will work for you too. I am going to give directions according to the Stitchwork Scarf pattern, so if you're working on something different, then you can just adjust it to whatever your stitch count is. So to get started, we need some worsted weight yarn, and I'm going to be using a 5mm hook. You can choose whatever size yarn and hook you'd like. For the loop stitch, you're going to want to make sure that you can grab the yarn very well. So if you're using something that's bulky, then you'll want a larger hook size just to make sure that things aren't falling off of your hook as you grab them. Okay, so let's get started. Like I said, I'm going to work our pattern according to the Stitchwork Scarf pattern. So we are going to start by chaining 31. If you aren't familiar with how to make a chain, I do have a beginner crochet tutorial. So you can check out that beginner crochet tutorial, and it goes over the 3 basic steps to start crocheting, how to make a slip knot, how to work a chain, and how to work a single crochet stitch. So this Stitchwork Scarf is still a good project for someone who is just starting out. We're going to go really slowly through all of the stitches, but you will want to have mastered those basics of the slip knot, the chain, and working a single crochet stitch. So let me count here. All right, I got a couple extras there. So I've got 31 stitches across, and now we're going to work back across our chain. We're just going to put 1 single crochet stitch into each chain. So we should have a total of 30 single crochet stitches. So there's our 30 stitches. So once you've finished row 1, this is going to be the front of your work. Where you've just worked those single crochet stitches across, that's going to be the front of your design. So we're going to chain 1 and turn, and in the next row we're going to work our loop stitch, and we're going to be pushing the loops away from us so that they turn up on the front side of our work. So chain 1 and then turn your work over. Loop stitch can be a bit of a yarn eater, so you want to make sure that you've got plenty of yarn. I do have yardage estimates that I've included in the Stitchwork Scarf, but the exact yardage that you use is going to depend on how large you make your loops. So to get started with the loop stitch, we're going to take our hook, we're going to insert it into the first single crochet stitch. Now, we're going to wrap the yarn over our finger, so you can see I've got it wrapped over top of my pointer finger. Then I'm going to take my hook and go over the top of the strand, and then I'm going to grab the back of the strand that's on the other side of my finger, And I'm going to pull both of those through the single crochet stitch. I'm going to yarn over, and I've got 3 loops on my hook. I'm going to pull through all 3. So that gives me a stitch, but I've got a loop that's hanging off the front. So let's do it again. I'm going to take my hook, I'm going to take my hook. I'm going to insert it into that space. I've got my yarn wrapped around my finger. I'm going to go over the top of the yarn. I'm going to grab the yarn behind my finger, and I'm going to pull both of them through that stitch space. So now I've got 3 loops on my hook. I'll yarn over and pull through all 3. And then I've got 2 loops. So it can feel a little bit funny at first figuring out how to hold everything, but once you get the hang of it, it does end up going pretty quickly. And you can see that the size of your loop will be, it can be adjusted based on how far out you pull the loop as you put it over your finger. So if I were to pull, way back here and grab the yarn with a large loop, then that's going to leave a much bigger a much bigger loop. So you want to try to keep the size somewhat similar, whether that's smaller or larger. You want to try to keep your tension the same as you go across. So one more time, I'll do it real slow here. Into the stitch space, I've got the yarn over my pointer finger. I'm going to go over the top of the yarn, grab it behind my finger, pull both of those strands through the stitch space. Then I'll yarn over, and I'm going to go through all 3 of those loops. If you find that you are making your loops really, really tight, then once you grab those 2 strands, it should move just a little bit. So if you need to pull on it to get it a little further away from your work, then you should be able to adjust it just a little bit. So continue working all the way across, and you're going to have a loop stitch in each space. So we'll end this row with 30 loop stitches. You can see how this is starting to curl up. I think the first row is probably the hardest because those loops really want to curl up on top of themselves. So if you need to stop and straighten things out to get them out of the way, then that's okay. If you have some variability in your loops, that is okay. You don't want to have one that is like way longer than the others, but if you have some that are a little bit longer and some that are a little bit shorter, that'll be okay. It's not going to be that noticeable once you work the whole section. You can see here how the yarn, because you're making that loop, you can see how it's a bit of a yarn eater. But it gives a very neat texture. So I've almost gotten to the end here. When you reach the end of row 2, if you need to, you can go back and count your loops just to make sure that you have the correct number. You're going to want 30 total. So you can either count the loops that are across the front of the work, or you can count the V's that are on top of the work. But you want to make sure that you've got 30 total across your row. When you reach the end of row 2, then you're going to chain 1 and turn everything back over. like I said, you can see how this is really wanting to curl. So that's why I think when you're first starting out loop stitch, it's pretty tricky. It does start to lay flat as you continue working up. And you can see here that my loops are kind of going every which way. They'll lay flat as we add some more, but you also can steam this block at the end, or once you've finished your scarf or whatever project you're working on. If you use a hand steamer, then that will help those loops lay flat. Okay, so now for row 3, this is an easy row. We're just going to work single crochet stitches all the way across the top of the loop stitches. So our pattern will be that we'll work a row of single crochet stitches, and that will be with our right side up, so the front of the work facing us, and then we'll turn the work around and work a row of loop stitch. And that will be with the wrong side facing up, so that the loops, when we make them working away from us, they'll be on the front side. So I've worked my single crochet stitches across row 3, and now I'm ready to do another row of loop stitch. So I'll chain 1, and then I'm going to turn the whole thing over again. All right, so again, we're going to insert our hook into the first space, have the yarn across your pointer finger, go over the top of the yarn and grab the yarn that's behind the finger, pull that through the stitch space, then yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on the hook. I do have step-by-step photos of this stitch that are available on my website. That is linked in the Stitchwork Scarf pattern. But sometimes having a stationary photo to show what you do with your hands, that sometimes can be helpful if the stitch is feeling tricky. And of course, if you're ever really stuck, then please always feel free to reach out to me. I love teaching, and I'm more than happy to help people figure out what works for them. Sometimes it's just a matter of explaining it in a different way, and then all of a sudden it clicks. So I'm going to get to the end of the row here, and I will show you what the front looks like. And then I will leave you to work this block on your own, and you can come back to see what the end of the block will look like. Even though it's a tricky stitch to learn, it really gives such a fun effect. I love the texture, the way that it pops off of the surface of your design, and especially on the scarf. I think it's a fun stitch to have at the end of the scarf, or in this case the beginning, but you know what I mean, at the bottom of the scarf where it drapes down. Okay, so when I get to the end of that row, I'll chain 1 and turn everything back over. So you can see my loops begin to stack on top of each other. And you can tug on the loops a little bit if you want to. I usually do that at the very end. But you can see they're starting to stack and giving this fun, whimsical texture off the front of our work. So you're going to continue in this same fashion. So the next row will be a single crochet row, then turn the work over and do a loop stitch row, and continue that until you get to a total of 26 rows. So you should end on a loop stitch row. And the way that you can count your rows is either by counting the loops, or if you turn this over and look at the back, you can see here that there's almost a line that's in between these two. So that is 2 rows. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you're having a hard time figuring out how many rows you've crocheted, then you can kind of use the back as a way to count by 2s. Wherever you see this line, that's going to be the top of 2 rows. So go ahead and finish the rows up through row 26, and I will be back to show you what that finished block looks like, and then we'll be ready to move on to block 2. Okay, so once you get to the end of row 26, this is what the back of your project should look like. So here's the front. You can see we have all those loops, and like I said, they kind of lay a little bit flatter as you work across the rows and up the blocks, so they kind of all meld together. But again, like I mentioned, if you wanted to use a steamer, then you can do that at the end of the project. But this is about what it'll look like. And then on the back, I showed how you can count those lines by 2s, just in case if you're not sure how many rows you have. So here I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, and 26. So if you are joining us for the Stitchwork Scarf, then you're going to want to take a stitch marker and put your stitch marker in this loop that your crochet hook was in, and that'll make sure that you're not going to lose your project. You know, it won't come unraveled as we're waiting for the next block. So you can mark that off and cut your yarn. You won't need this in the next section, so you can cut that yarn. Don't weave that tail in yet, because I'm actually going to show you how we can color change when we come back for the next block. So you can just leave it for now. And then that is the end of your loop stitch block. So if you just can't wait, then you can find the pattern PDF available on Etsy or on Ravelry, and you can go ahead and get started with the next block. But if you are joining for the stitch along, then in a couple days I will have the next block out. So thank you guys for joining us, and I'll be back soon.